Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. On this channel we oftentimes criticize the Galactic Empire's military. We've labeled Palpatine's complete retirement of the clone army as premature and unnecessary. We talked about how wasteful it was for the Empire to completely replace all of the Republic Navy's vessels, from the mighty Venator-class Star Destroyer to the individual starfighters. We've also done several in-depth videos challenging the Empire's many Star Destroyer lines and how they were basically antiquated designs that focused more on form rather than function. We've even done videos calling the Imperial military a paper tiger, as in it looks ferocious on the outside and also on paper, but when it actually enters battle, there are some significant issues that rise to the surface. Now, in those videos, we routinely get this one comment. What if Grand Admiral Thrawn had more political power? What if the Emperor trusted him more than his other advisors? Would that have changed the outcome of the Galactic Civil War? I think this is a great question. You know, Palpatine, like most dictators, didn't do everything himself. He had underlings who would work on competing projects, and eventually these projects would be, placed in front of him and he would choose which one was better. For instance, while Grand Moff Tarkin and director Orson Krennic were very supportive of the first Death Star program, Darth Vader and Grand Admiral Thrawn both were not. You see, Vader believed that the Death Star program was unnecessary because the Force provided all the power one could need. And Grand Admiral Thrawn rightly saw the Death Star project as a huge concentration of resources, which made it a very vulnerable and wasteful project. As a matter of fact, Thrawn was directly competing for resources against Project Stardust.
Your TIE Defender program is at risk. Orson Krennic has been quite persuasive about diverting the funding to his own project, Stardust.
The Emperor has assured me that he supports my project.
Although Tarkin's name was closely tied to Project Stardust, it wasn't until Orson Krennic test-fired the superweapon on Jedha that Tarkin would swoop in and take over. Just a few years earlier, however, he was still playing both sides. He wanted to make sure he was positioned in the right place to take over either project when it became more lucrative.
In my view, Director Krennic's project has been nothing but expenses and excuses for years on end. If construction of the Defender is to continue, you must make your case directly to the Emperor himself. I have already arranged the meeting.
Now, what would have happened if Orson Krennic continued struggling to get Project Stardust completed? What if Tarkin took a more active approach to supporting Thrawn's project over Krennic's? What would have happened to the Empire had Palpatine put more resources into Thrawn's TIE Defender project rather than Project Stardust? Could this have led to a more positive outcome for the Empire during the Galactic Civil War? Could this single fighter have even saved the Empire? Before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, saber.com. They make these very awesome looking lightsabers. Wow, that is bright. Right now, they have an awesome deal for you guys. If you buy one Padawan saber, you can get another Padawan saber for free, as long as both have the same level soundboard installed internally. Just add both lightsabers to the cart and the savings will be automatically applied. If you guys like lightsabers, I highly recommend you check out saber.com's website. They have a huge selection of original lightsaber designs, along with a huge selection of replica lightsabers for almost every character in Star Wars. Check out the link in the description below for more information. As usual, thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. Project Stardust was a black project, and its budget was never clearly calculated. After all, how do you calculate all of the resources the Empire plundered from planets it nationalized? How do you calculate the worth of an Imperial prisoner who works in a labor workshop, or the output of an entire Geonosian hive? I mean, the budget for keeping this project a secret from prying eyes alone must have cost a ridiculous amount of credits. Whatever the cost it might have been, it was probably astronomical. And so with Project Stardust being removed from the Imperial budget, suddenly you have quite a lot of resources for Thrawn's TIE Defender program. And that money will be helpful almost immediately. You see, one of the biggest hurdles that the TIE Defender program faced was cost per unit. It costs around 300,000 credits for just one of these things. That makes it double the price of a T-65B X-Wing and 5 times the price of a basic TIE starfighter. And if you really think about it, no amount of superior performance can really justify the TIE Defender if it costs 5 times more than the thing it's trying to replace. As awesome as a single TIE Defender might be, it'll never be able to defeat 5 standard TIE fighters in a straight-up battle. And this is why, for the most part, Thrawn envisioned the TIE Defender as a premium or elite starfighter that would only be deployed in smaller unit sizes. Thrawn specifically envisioned this as a platform that would directly go up against Rebel forces. You know how Darth Vader had the Death Squadron created to hunt down the Rebels? Well, the TIE Defender would have been perfect for this unit. The cost of outfitting just one fleet with the expensive TIE Defender is far more doable than a massive rollout. Especially because for most backorder Imperial outposts, the TIE Defender was probably overkill and unnecessarily overpowered. Or was it? Well, one of the things that Thrawn can do if he has Project Stardust's budget underneath his control is scale up the TIE Defender program so that it appears more frequently in the fleet, like the more common TIE Interceptor. Maybe for every 10 basic TIE fighters, you could have at least one TIE Defender for, specific targets or missions. Or Thrawn could make a bigger push to just replace all of the TIE fighters with Defenders. The larger the initial order that Thrawn makes for the TIE Defender, the cheaper it will cost per unit. When Thrawn rolls out the original version of the TIE Defender, it costs $300,000 because he only has one factory in Lothal, and that factory is sourcing parts that are basically custom made and only used on the TIE Defender, which of course makes it really expensive. If you scale up production of the TIE Defender to the entire fleet, maybe instead of costing 300,000 credits, it could cost half the price at 150 or even lower at 100,000 credits. If the TIE Defender was rolled out, in massive quantities all across the galaxy, it would create a huge headache for the Rebellion. I mean, this is not something the Rebel fleet would be able to prepare for. You see, the TIE Defender is not actually overkill for those backorder systems we talked about. It's perfect. A TIE Defender might not be able to take on 5 regular TIE fighters, but it really doesn't need to. It has tools on board that other Imperial pilots can never dream of. And all starts with the hyperdrive. The TIE Defender has a Class 2.0 hyperdrive installed onto it. It's one of the first mass-produced TIE fighters to have a hyperdrive. While it wasn't as fast as what most Rebel capital ships and fighters were equipped with, it would definitely extend the reach of Imperial outposts and capital ships with TIE Defenders stationed on them. I mean, the real reason why the Empire adopted the Tarkin Doctrine was because it understood what the Republic did before it. There's just too much territory in the galaxy for it to control. The Republic localized the issue of defense and passed the responsibility of systems defense to local forces. The Empire strategy was to try to scare the galaxy into obedience. Neither strategy really worked that well. Now, within a few years, it became very clear that the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, the backbone of the Imperial fleet, was just too large of a concentration of resources in one vessel. Yes, the ISD could destroy almost every non-Imperial ship in the galaxy in a one-on-one fight, but the Rebel forces, the pirates and bandits that troubled the Empire, would just adopt different tactics and avoid a straight-up fight with one of these beasts. Now, each sector fleet had around half a dozen to a few dozen Imperial-class Star Destroyers, and that fleet had to watch over more than 50 inhabited planets, moons, and space stations. This means there was always a gap in the Imperial defensive network's coverage. And so the enemies of the Empire would strike these soft targets, munition depots that were unguarded outer rim pay stations that maybe only had a rotating schedule of ISDs visiting it. And once the Rebels had informants that could tell you where these ISDs were going, it became very easy for them to telegraph the optimal system to strike. Now, the Imperial-class Star Destroyer never had as large of a hangar as the Benedict-class Star Destroyer. Huge mistake, if you ask me. But still, it could carry around a full wing of starfighters into battle, which really isn't that shabby. Now, before, with the basic TIE fighter and even the TIE Interceptors, these starfighters were mainly used as escorts and focused on screening enemy fighters from attacking the ISD. But if you guys have a bunch of TIE Defenders on board, first of all, you'll need less of these TIE Defenders to protect your Star Destroyer from enemy fighters, and you can also assign these TIE Defenders on longer patrol missions to nearby sectors or systems so that you can expand your range and intelligence gathering capabilities. If your entire sector fleet has TIE Defenders, suddenly the prospect of guarding an entire sector becomes that much easier. If you have a bunch of random patrols with these hyperdrive equipped starfighters going everywhere, then it becomes very hard to predict where the Empire will be and where they won't. And as we've seen before, it only really takes one single TIE Defender to really hamper Rebel operations. When Mon Mothma attempted to escape from Coruscant and join up with the Rebellion, she was pursued by a TIE Defender. This single craft was relentless and made short work of Mon Mothma's entire escort from Gold Squadron. We've also seen TIE Defenders go up against X-Wings during Hera Syndulla's failed attempt to breach the Lothal blockade. The results were as expected. The TIE Defenders were able to make quick work of most Rebel fighters, even X-Wings. And if you take a quick look at the stats of a TIE Defender, you'll understand why this ship was so ridiculously overpowered. First, it was a TIE fighter, which means it was a relatively small target to hit, and it's quite nimble. This vessel also had 3 S-foils instead of just the usual 2, and these S-foils weren't mounted on the sides of the craft but behind the cockpit, giving the pilot even more armor and protection from the rear. This is great because one of the biggest criticisms of the Empire was that it spent so much resources trying to find and train the best pilots in the galaxy, only to place them in essentially flimsy ball-shaped Durasteel coffins. The TIE Defender was designed from the beginning for survivability, and also had a very robust deflector shield system that could take several strikes. The Defender also had 8 LS 9.3 laser cannons, 6 of them on the wingtip and 2 chin-mounted. These LS 9.3s were an upgrade from the LS-1 laser cannons used by the standard TIE fighter, and those were already seen as quite robust for dogfighting. The TIE Defender's 8 laser cannons could quickly whittle down even the most robust starfighter shields, and it could even take out light freighters and pose a danger to corvettes. And we haven't even gotten to the TIE Defender's missiles. It has concussion missiles, proton torpedoes, ion torpedoes. There's even a tractor being built into this thing so that you could, potentially arrest other pilots. And on top of that, the TIE Defender's sublight speed was blistering fast at 115 megalight per hour. That makes it faster than the T-65B X-Wing at 100 megalight per hour. It also makes it faster than even the TIE Interceptor at 110 megalights per hour, and just a tiny bit slower than the fastest interceptor in the galaxy, the A-Wing, which could fly at 120 megalights per hour. Now, had the Empire sent more TIE Defenders during the mission to, capture Mon Mothma, I think they would have been far more successful. They would have either killed her or detained her. If TIE Defenders had been at the Battle of Yavin 4, even if they were deployed late, I think those 8 laser cannons would have made quick work of anyone who got in front of them in the trench run. In every major battle of the Galactic Civil War, especially those earlier ones, the TIE Defender would have made a huge difference for the Empire. At the Battle of Atollon, the TIE Defender could have crushed the Rebel forces and destroyed Bo-Katan's Mandalorian reinforcements. At Scarif, had a swarm of TIE Defenders met the Rebel fleet instead of just basic TIEs, then Admiral Radiss's fleet would have been ripped apart in orbit. On a side note, even Darth Vader was positive about the TIE Defender. He actually flew it around and he enjoyed it so much that he told Thrawn that he would put in a good word about the project to Emperor Palpatine, which is something he rarely ever did. Vader also suggested that Thrawn upgrade the ship further to make it even more powerful, which is where the TIE Defender Elite variant comes into play. This upgraded version costs around 10,000 credits more, and it could fly as fast as the RZ-1 A-Wing, making it one of the fastest sublight vessels in the galaxy. The Elite variant also had 6 missile launchers instead of just 2, which allowed it to engage multiple targets at the same time, and Darth Vader also wanted the control scheme to be simplified somewhat so that more pilots could fly it. I definitely agree that the TIE Defender and Elite variant of the TIE Defender would have put a lot of pressure on the rebellion. They would have probably lost leaders like Mon Mothma, who in many ways was irreplaceable. Heck, the rebels could have even lost at Yavin, which would have wiped out almost their entire command structure. Even Luke Skywalker and Han Solo would have a difficult time surviving the TIE Defender's capabilities. But as we've mentioned in previous videos, the Galactic Civil War was not a war that Palpatine could win through military means alone. This was a civil war. You were targeting essentially your own people. Destroying rebel bases and fleets helped destroy the symptoms of a civil war. But preventing people from rebelling is not something a starfighter platform could do. If the Death Star didn't scare people into obedience, why would a Defender have a better chance of doing that? The TIE Defender makes the Imperial military more deadly, it makes it more efficient, and it extends the reach of the Imperial military, which are really important factors here. And while the rebellion as we know it might get destroyed, who's to say that Palpatine's terrible economic policies and cruel treatment of his people won't just create more rebel movements in the future? When we take a look at the Alliance to Restore the Republic, we see a diverse group of political organizations that all have their own specific beefs with the Empire. And these factions formed during the early Imperial era when, Palpatine was still a pretty reasonable leader during this time period. The military wasn't in charge of the government. The Imperial Senate was still around. Things weren't really that bad, and you already had so many rebel movements. And what unified these rebels was really just their hatred of the Empire and the cruelty of Emperor Palpatine's actions. What Palpatine really needed to end the Galactic Civil War and ensure the survival of the Empire was to figure out a way to create meaningful political, economic, and social change. We always talk about how every leader, even dictators, are kind of beholden to the will of their civilian populace. And And when it comes to dictators, there's usually a deal that's cut between the dictator and the people. Usually what happens is the populace agrees to give up its voting privileges and engagement in politics, and as a result, the dictator is supposed to provide economic stability and happiness, and also peace and security. And so the Galactic Civil War was not the result of the Imperial military being dysfunctional, it was a result of that trust between the Empire and its people breaking down. And when that happens, no amount of oppression and brutality will bring the rebellion back into its box. Yes, the first wave of rebels, the ones that we grew up with, might have failed in their attempts to fight off the TIE Defender, but new generations would rise up afterwards. Even if the X-Wing becomes vulnerable thanks to the TIE Defenders, who's to say that the rebellion won't resort to more desperate tactics like using an X-Wing as a hyperspace missile? Or what if the X-Wing gets its own upgrades in order to stand up against the TIE Defender? The possibilities are endless as long as the will to fight is there. And that's just not something that the TIE Defender could target, even with its 8 laser cannons. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.